This is meant to be instructive but also fun. I don't want to lecture to you guys. So at any point you want to interrupt, you got a question, by all means, just jump in. There'll be a lot of back and forth and I welcome it at any point. Don't feel intimidated to go ahead and ask me during the conversation. I've been doing comic book retailing in one way, shape, or form for decades. So I'm always talking to customers about the wisdom of collecting. I'll render opinions, but mostly it's not opinions to destroy a competitor or somebody else. It's just experiences that I've had with the genre of this business, and then you draw your own conclusions from there. We use the term forensic comicology at my store. It's a joke, it's a gag. And it came about because I've helped several law enforcement agencies who have recovered stolen comic books to identify the victims. I've helped victims locate their stolen comic book collections, and we've had people arrested and search warrants issued all over comic books. So at that point, I started jokingly calling myself a forensic man because I can go in and CSI a comic book collection and help law enforcement nail down some aspect of it. And the comicology just seemed to be the natural that tagline to the forensic thing. I own a comic book store here in town, Southern California Comics. You may have noticed that little sign on the table. I've been doing that job for about 16 years. Before that, I was a Comic-Con rat for years. I did Comic-Con all the way back to my first show in '72, so I have intimate moments with the El Cortez days and everything since then. And what I've learned over the years is that you don't get to learn how to be a collector of anything in college. They don't teach you anything anywhere on how to make wise decisions when it comes to where to put your money in your collectibles. So at some point, all of us have just had questions and found nobody that they either felt warm enough to ask or comfortable enough to bother, and try to get some information about this wide range, this wide field of collecting. For our purposes, we're just going to stick with comic books because I can talk about a wide range of stuff. With 35 years plus of experience, I get questions that I can answer much more freely now than I ever did before because I've been burned like everybody else has, and I've figured out how to protect myself. And over the years, I've achieved certain credentials. In fact, being a founding or advisor for the Overstreet Price Guide has helped me to establish my bona fides and my credentials. And we'll go into the book a little bit later. I have other backgrounds. I know it's been mentioned. I'm a retired San Diego police officer. I did 20 years with the police department. So I've explained the forensic comicologist thing. It has something to do with my law enforcement background. That's how I was able to get into that format to help the cops out, because guys I worked with, where are you going to go to find out who can help you with a stolen comic book collection? But a retired cop who collects comics. It's a natural. The mentoring is something that I want to bring out, and that's what I want to do for you guys, is to show you that you're not walking naked into the woods in the art of collecting comic books. You actually have guys like me out there. We've got a centered moral compass who have ethics, who are willing to answer questions, willing to tell you things you don't want to hear in order to make smarter decisions. You might have been going along all your life putting money into comic books, but you might have been doing it incorrectly. I'm just going to give you an alternative. So what I'm going to do is jump right into the meat of this thing. I'm assuming everybody here has an interest in comic books. You've probably been buying the books you like. In some cases, you've been buying the books that you were told to like, or the books that you thought would go up in value. Back in the day, people used to buy comic book collections and then fill a run, and that was what they wanted to do. Nowadays, everyone's trying to buy that one particular comic book. And in order for them to do that, many times they go on eBay and they go and look for the book and they get burned, or they bought the one they thought they wanted and they may have paid a little bit too much. What you can do to save yourself from this hassle is to understand what is worth collecting. And there are a couple of rules that I believe in and I want to impart onto you. First rule is buy what you want to buy. Don't buy what someone tells you to buy because it's supposed to be the book you need to invest in. And buy what you can afford. If it's a $450 comic book and you were told to buy it, wait, talk to somebody, make sure you're making the right decision. If you can afford the book and you want the book, buy the book. But make sure it's the kind of copy you wanted to buy. In our business, right now, the market is driven by key books, people who want the most exotic, hottest book going. Some people buy them because they've always wanted to own it and own a copy when they were younger, want another one. Others can't afford them then, and now they can afford them. And still others are told, you need to buy this book because it's going to go up in value. Traditionally, we call those books key books. A key book fits into a narrow, confined space of of the whole genre of collecting comic books. There are really only several hundred nationally known key books. So what we thought we would do is we would put some books up here and go over the significance of these books, kind of make it fun for you guys. And I got some small facts here just to give you an idea of what a key book is. And keeping in mind, these are the holy grails of comic books that as collectors, if you decided that you wanted to own something to pass on to your children, which is a frequent comment I hear at my store, or if you want to own something that you thought you could get some relative short gain value, or if you simply wanted something that just fills a gap in your collecting mantra, then this is what we're going to do. Everybody knows about Action 1. I'm not going to go into a lot of significance about this, but what I wanted to tell you is you're looking at a graded copy. For those of you who are not familiar with CGC, it is a third-party grading system. There are only 2 companies, and I'll go into that a little bit. CGC is significant because once that book is encapsulated, that is supposed to be the end-all and be-all for that copy of the book. Its status will never change, only its value changes at that point. It can't be altered, it can't be changed to try and fool somebody, it's locked in. So right now we're looking at it, and you hear about these books in the news all the time, but you got to ask yourself, if it's selling for over $2 million, how many of them are there? Well, what we did was we did some research and found that CGC's only recorded 57 copies of this book in existence. That's it. 57 copies for a book published in 1938. And that's, I believe there are probably twice that many raw copies out there. I know there are copies that are supposed to be better than that. I mean, I know there's at least a 9.2 out there that's raw, that's never been CGC'd. You guys have watched the news, so that copy, or a copy similar to this one, a 9.0, went for $2.16 million. This is the key. This is the key none of us here should be able to afford. If you can, you probably don't need to hear me because you've already done it all. So this is the first key. This is the one that sets the bar for every other key book. Again, this is now hitting the, this hits the market purely as an investment quality book. The top 1% of the American population is selling this book back and forth to each other all the time. For those of you who are familiar with Nicolas Cage's once popular comic book collection, he had an Action 1 that was stolen from him. And that book disappeared, and he put his collection up for auction after that. And right about that time, he divorced Lisa Marie Presley. Fast forward years later, and his copy shows up at a storage unit auction. And the mystery is solved. He'd already claimed the insurance for the book, which was about $800,000. So the book resurfaces, and they have to give the book back to him since he was the victim. He apparently, the theory is, because it's not known, that he paid back the insurance company, but the book itself sold for over $2 million, so it didn't matter. He made a hefty profit. He probably did better selling it 12 years later when it was recovered than he would have if he'd sold it back when he still had it. So by having it stolen, he made out. That's a key book. Another example, we're going to move forward. We're talking about the golden age. I don't know, you guys know all the genres about, or the different levels of age groups for comic books. We start with the platinum age, which is pre-mid 30s. Then you hit the golden age, which is mid to late 30s, and golden age simply is a demarcation in time for an age group of comic books. You guys, everybody understands what that stuff means? So not, just like coins of the realm and everything else, gold is followed by silver, followed by copper. So what we have here is the next age, which is silver. The Silver Age, the guys that started the Overstreet Price Guide, the first generation of fans and collectors, the guys who predate me by 10 years, they all got together at some point in the early to mid-60s and defined these age groups. They needed to pick points, reference points in time to pick or gold, silver, bronze. So they realized that my generation and the guys slightly older than me, their relationship to comics changed with the introduction of the brand new Flash in 1956. So with Showcase introduced the Silver Age version of the Flash, as we call it the Silver Age, that created the Silver Age. And that's the transition point from gold to silver. So there are other facts that delineate these differences, but I'm just going off in brief general terms. So for a key book, for instance, from the Silver Age, this would be an early one. This is a Showcase 4. This is a known graded copy, and there are only 251 of these books known to exist. So if you own one of these, you're owning one of the pinnacles of Silver Age collecting. But a lot of people are not that interested in this book because Marvel comic books runs the table. In our world, key books, there are levels, and Marvel is at the top of the food chain. It's just the image that they carry. Marvel keys carry a desirability with them that many DC keys are only second tier to. So we started with this one just to give you an idea of the transition point from gold to silver, but as a key book goes, this one is the holy grail of key books. Do not mistake any other book from the 50s or the 60s all the way up to the present. This book right now carries as much weight as an Action #1, not only in desirability, but in achieved auction prices. A Amazing Fantasy 15 sold for $1.1 million last year. So understand that these books are not only highly desirable keys, but there are over 1,800 copies of this book known to exist as slapped books. Comparative to 57 copies of Action 1, a lot of players get a shot at owning this book, but the desirability is the same as an Action 1. So you have a better chance of finding one of these and turning it over for a profit later on. I've had low-grade copies of this thing at my store. It looks like the book's been driven over, set on fire, and put out with a garden hose, and I've sold those for thousands of dollars. The book transcends guide value, it transcends all rationale. So this is a key example of a key book from the 60s, and this is the book, if you start discussing where you're going to put your money, if you were going to invest in comics, this is a prime example of what I would recommend. Historically, it continues to defy all odds and goes up in value. But this is just an example of another key book. We have more. The FF48, this is the first Silver Surfer, first Galactus, big deal book. There's over 3,000 graded copies of this, but there are thousands of raw copies. The book is extremely available, and yet the demand for this thing is huge. And strangely, in low grade, you can get one of these for 50 bucks. I would rather have a stack of these in low grade than one high grade book. I could make thousands all the time because this thing never fails to appeal to people. So you would want to be able to zero in, and this is sort of a late 60s, mid to late 60s example of a Silver Age book. This is yet another key book. Knowing there are plenty of copies out there, it shouldn't be hard for anybody to find one. We'll move on to the next zone. 1970 is the transition point from silver to bronze. Is there anybody here who's not familiar with this book? Anyone at all? Raise your hand, don't be shy. Okay, you're familiar with the Hulk, and you've heard of the Wolverine. Well, the Wolverine had to come from somewhere, right? So his first appearance was in this book. For whatever reason, he sold in huge numbers because the character didn't look any more enticing than any other Bronze Age character from the 70s. In fact, if you look at the costume, it just looks sort of goofy. It looks like something from Logan's Run with claws. But the genesis of this character was the guys at Marvel, Len Wein, I think it was Roy Thomas, and maybe Stan, they were looking for a Canadian hero. They wanted to introduce Canadian heroes. They wanted to grab the Canadian comic book market. So they needed to introduce something that Canadians would buy, and they could double their profit margin. So they got together and they were looking at all the things you can find in Canada, and they narrowed it down to two things, a badger or a wolverine. So they made the Wolverine the character, and he was supposed to be a villain. Then they realized he's an anti-hero. And that worked well, and it's worked well for all of us, because anti-heroes, that's the direction our whole lineage of comic book fantasy has gone. Everybody is an anti-hero. So there you go. Now, this is the most desirable Bronze Age book, Bronze Age being 1970 to 1980, that exists. There are some close runner-ups. The first Punisher, the first Thanos, the Gwen Stacy death storyline in Amazing Spider-Man, which was a two-part storyline. But by far, this thing topples everybody. We went ahead to find out how many graded copies there were, and there's over 5,400 graded copies. There's got to be 8 times that many raw copies. I still have them walking into the store, people trying to unload a copy from me. And this being that this is a key book, it also follows the same pattern as the other key books. The prices on these things that are obtainable transcend the Overstreet price guide. Whatever the book says is not accurate. Even when it's accurate, it's not accurate. The buyers and sellers have agreed long ago that they can buy and sell these things at different numbers than what you would read in this book. This is just a starting point, but this book is awesome in its popularity, its desirability, and its investment quality. So that's the Bronze Age, the 70s. We'll move forward again, and it's debatable what era this is, but this is the 80s. I've heard it termed the Copper Age. We call it the modern age, sort of kicks off from the 80s to the present. So there's this 30-year gap where there's no iconic tag name for this generation. It's just the 80s or the modern age. The Batman Dark Knight, this is the Frank Miller storyline where he changes everything we knew about Batman. He introduces this future version, a darker, grimmer Batman, which captured everyone's imagination, which was responsible for the creation of characters like Spawn, the anti-hero, the hero that's disgusted with the way things are. He's mean, he's going to use a gun, he's down to earth, he's just as pissed off as we are. So that's what this is about, but this is still a key book. There are 991 graded copies, but there were far more thousands that were sold. It's probably a little overpriced, mostly because the thing has been reproduced and reprinted so many times it's watered down. It's diluted its value, but that is still considered a key book, and that's an 80s book. And now we'll bring you forward into the 90s, and that's where I'm going to stop on the key book knowledge. I don't even know if all you guys know who the New Mutants are, so don't worry about it. It's a supergroup for Marvel. Remember, Marvel runs the table. They're the ones who generated the key books that are the most popular books, are almost always Marvel books. Deadpool. This is the first adventure of a character named Deadpool. He's a tongue-in-cheek character. He's a wisecracking mercenary. He has the same healing factor that Wolverine has, so you can't get rid of him. He's always around. Because this character continues to generate big money for Marvel, Marvel keeps trying to parlay that into as many titles, as much exposure as he can get. Even though most people probably haven't heard of this character outside of our room, this is a key book. This is one of the most important key books from the 90s. It's also one of the most expensive, and the price tag is completely transcendent. It just keeps going up for reasons unknown to me. But it doesn't matter why, it matters if. If you can get a hold of this book, by all means, this is an example of a book that is just knocking down doors and changing the way that we define a key book. So I think we looked this up, like over 3,000 copies of this thing has been graded. The only reason there aren't more copies of that book being graded is because the standards, the cost for grading these books, get to the point where the cost of grading it is as expensive as the actual value of the book. So a lot of people just can't afford to. It's too expensive. Does anybody have a question?
I have a question.
Sure.
Are there any independent comic book publishers that have raised to the status of key books?
There were key books in the past. Xenozoic Tales, I think that was Kitchen Sink for a while. That Mark Schultz stuff was really hot, and then it just flatlined. It had provided us with Cadillacs and dinosaurs, but for independent stuff, there's Cerebus, and there is
Bone?
not so much.
Really?
Bone used to be.
And Turtles?
Oh, nah, let's not even go there. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Remember, in the first format came out in more or less like a magazine size. Eastman and Laird created this thing. They put out one printing, and I think there were 1,500 copies, and then within a year they put out a second printing, and then more printings came. That would probably be a prime example of the Action Comics #1 of the 80s. They're so rare that when you get a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 first printing, you can call your own shot. The price guide may have a $500 price tag on a high copy. You can get $2,000, $2,500 easy. It's just completely out of whack. And now the second and third printings, which is completely unheard of in our business, are going up in value. No multiple printings go up in value, but that book does. So yes, to answer your question, there are indies. There are actually a lot of keys. I don't necessarily want you guys to know all my secrets so I can go out and hoard all the keys myself, but there are a lot of key books. I can only give you, in the limited time I have, some examples. If you can think of some keys, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I know Cerebus is, but the problem is, key books have a significance in that they get a lot of press time. The characters are currently in rotation in new comic books or in the movies or in action figures. Some things just reach a peak and then they disappear from the public eye, Bone and Cerebus being two examples. They're just not being produced. They were produced for a generation that remembers them, but there's no new generation latching on. There's nothing to latch on to, only the reproduced trade copies. So they've lost ground in that fashion. However, something like Bone 1 and Cerebus 1 are so rare, it's almost impossible to define what they will do because nobody's ever got them to sell. Yeah. I could pop up with one now and find that the whole thing is reversed and that everyone's beating their door down to get to me. When you do this, when you buy comic books, you've got to understand that there are two aspects of collecting that bear equal weight. The grade of the comic book and the value of the comic book. You cannot have one without the other. They are interchangeable. If you want to buy a copy of this book in high grade, it's $175. If you buy one that's sitting in somebody's dollar bins, it's $1. But why is it in the dollar bins? Well, because a coupon's been cut out, a page is torn, it's got a lot of little rack dings on the spine where it's all bent, creased. It's got a coffee cup stain on it. Those all have their own individual grades, but they matter. They matter a tremendous amount. The price guide has a 10-point grading system that used to be in a lot of us remember when it was VG and very fine, and we used a letter system. About 10 or 15 years ago, the powers that be redefined grading and used the 10-point scale. They had differed from the 100-point scale that was proposed. That was too unwieldy. So what they did is they took the grading standards that they had created themselves, which mimic grading standards from coins and stamps and cards from days gone by, and they produced a set of protectionist standards for you to be able to determine, I know what my book is worth because it has this grade on it, and I shouldn't have to pay more than what this book says it's worth, because that's what this book is worth in this grade. In my day, which is our day, everybody walked around the dealer's room at the Il Cortez with one of these books in their hands. Everybody had this thing, and everybody's going through and comparing prices and grades and everything else, grading wasn't as tight then as it is now. It has tightened up because the dollar figures on books has gotten so unwieldy that you have to have a more objective system of grading to protect us. So we have this 10-point grading system based on the defects and tolerable damage that you can find in a comic book. When you go to a dealer's room to buy a New Mutants number 98, and you see the $175 copy, it's up to you to know why it's $175. If there's a grade posted on the dealer's sticker or there's some indication the dealer tells you what he's thinking and he's telling you why it's $175, he's going to base it on a couple of things. But ultimately, you have to decide, is it based on the fact that I'm not getting ripped off? That $175 isn't actually a $50 book that the system is jacked up so that they can make a pile of money. Well, that happens. The best way you can figure it out is if you understand grading, you can look at the book. If the grade matches the price and vice versa, then you have a good book to buy. You've got a starting point to try and haggle, and that's what you want to do. The Overstreet Grading Guide was produced some time ago, where all it is a more definitive venture at trying to explain grades, because grading is very tough to do. It's difficult to teach people how to grade. There are so many subtle nuances to understand grading that you literally have to learn how to grade on your own and then test yourself. I have managed over the years to teach one employee out of all the employees. I've had dozens. One employee has learned how to grade. It's a very tough thing to tackle. They just can't do it. But by learning how to grade, they also understand that they can figure out what a book is worth when a collection comes in, so we know what it's worth to us to buy it and sell it. You as a layperson who may be uncomfortable with grading or may not understand it, you want to try your hand at grading using the price guide, but then you won't know what success you have unless you can provide, you can bring it to somebody who knows how to grade and let them render an opinion. This is what I do at my store. I encourage people to try their hand at grading and then bring it to me, not as a challenge, but as a test of your skill. When you master grading, now you can't be ripped off because you can walk into any dealer's room and know if somebody's misgraded a book, because misgrading used to cost dozens and then hundreds of dollars. Now it's in the tens of thousands of dollars. It's extremely important that you understand how to grade so that you don't get ripped off. You can test your skills any number of ways. I learned the hard way. I learned at Comic-Con in the 70s. I had a 12-year-old kid come up to me when I was selling at Avengers 1 at El Cortez. I had a price tag of $150, and I think we had a fine, which is a 6.0 grade on it. That little 12-year-old pointed out the defects I missed and got me down to 100 because he said it's a VG fine. I don't ever want to repeat that experience ever again. But it was true. You're going to be tested, and that's why I've done dozens of Comic-Cons. I've done them all from here all the way to Copenhagen. And you want to have your skills tight when it comes to grading so that you can attach a grade to a book, sell it knowing it's that grade, and not have to go through all these arguments with people.
One thing that I've noticed, this may be inaccurate, but my impression has been that the color of the paper, I guess paper quality in a sense, seems to be less important now. That you could actually have a very high grade like CGC book that has a lot more yellowing in the pages than the old VG Fine grading system would have tolerated. Is that the case that you
Well, you're talking about CGC. Now, we keep in mind, and we'll get into that in a bit, there is what's called an OWL chart, which is this color chart that was created a long time ago that told you how to tag a color of paper with a specific term. And that term was to fit into the grade, because it would be explained in the Overstreet Price Guide. White pages, white to off-white, off-white pages, cream to off-white, tan to cream, tan, browning. Like the 10-point system, they have gradients.
Yeah.
I understand that a book that has white pages can be near mint. I also understand that a book that has white to off-white pages can be near mint as well, because the book says so. But the off-white book cannot be near mint. So there are varying levels in the near mint category where they've refined the art of grading to such a fine line that it's arguable, literally arguable. CGC set a standard that says 1940s book should grade the same as a 1990s book. That's what we're all taught, but it's not true. I have plenty of examples where that's not held up. There's the thing that they've changed their standards over the years. Nobody's going to back that up. They simply won't. But there is that probability that if you had to make a choice between a near mint that had white pages and a near mint that had white to off-white pages, and you want to figure out which one to buy, obviously you go for the better copy. Better being white pages, even though they probably both grade the same.
Yeah.
Just understand that everything is supposed to be tightly, but there is some subjective ranges in there. That's the tough part about doing this as a collector. Just when you listen to me and I tell you exactly how it is, then you find out, well, it's not exactly how it is. That's where your judgment comes in. That's asking questions and having a guy like me in your corner to back up your decision, to tell you, yeah, that's a good idea. Fair market value. These are the things that really confuse people. There are price structures based on price guides. There are pricings you've seen on books on eBay where you can't believe a book didn't sell for this much or it's sold for that much. There are archived auction sites that have records of what they've sold their books for. The thing is everything still, it all still is based on the same fact that the grade of the book is the starting point. The price has to, if it doesn't match the grade, then the guy selling it has to be able to establish why he has a price attached to this grade. Just because it has a certain grade doesn't mean I have to sell it at that price. But you have to appreciate the fact that the dealer understands that that's what the grade is, and then a fair dealer who knows he's not going to gouge somebody is going to attach a price that he thinks he can get or what the book says it is. But just keep in mind the grading is the important thing. When you're buying stuff through the internet, for instance, you want to make sure that you understand when you're on eBay, the price of a comic book is not the buy it now price. It is what the completed listings tell you. Pawn Stars, Storage Wars, all of these reality shows are great for divulging this kind of information. It's when the money crosses palms, that's the price. eBay is ripe with people who feel that a buy it now is what a price tag should be, is what a comic book is worth. But I look at eBay and I see guys asking ungodly prices for things they'll never get. And then I'll click only on completed listings, find identical books that went for fraction. That's what the book is worth. There's such a massive number of people selling and buying on eBay that they've set their own trends now that go back to the late 90s. They've set their own archives that you can trust. Those completed auctions are probably what your book is worth. If you've got no other way to judge what your book is worth, but you're fairly certain on the grade, that's a starting point. One of the differences, though, I have to bring this in as a caveat. If you go to my store and buy a comic book for $10, you got a $10 book. You buy the same book on eBay for $10, it is not a $10 book. It is $10 plus the cost of shipping. When we buy collections and we can't figure out what something's worth, we'll look on eBay as a source. And we'll look at the shipping, and that's part of the price you're going to pay. So I'll buy that book for resale at the store, but you're going to pay $15 because it was $10 plus $5 shipping, and that's what buyers are willing to pay. When you buy on eBay, always keep in mind you're paying for somebody else's shipping. You want to find this product outside of eBay and not pay somebody else's shipping. So that's just a consideration I like to throw out there. People they want to pass by that because they don't want to think about it, but you really do have to think about it. That extra $5 is 1/3 more than you were willing to pay. We talked about CGC. I'm going to go further into that. The difference, though, is a raw book is a naked book. It's a book that has not been submitted to CGC. A CGC container adds a certain solidity to the value of the book. It will never go down. It will always stay the same or go up. But that means when you CGC something, in all likelihood, the dealer's going to tag on that extra cost to you. If you're a good grader, you can actually go to a Comic-Con, find the book you want raw, and then send it off to CGC because you know when it's CGC'd it goes for a lot more. But you don't want to pay the CGC price because that dealer's tagged on another $400 to it just because he got it CGC. So you find the raw copy. That's the smart way to buy. This is where grading becomes, and I'm going to keep harping on grading too. Grading is fundamental because you can save a fortune and make a lot of money. That's how my business continues to thrive. My skill set provides me with the ability to go in and buy a book. I'll give you an example. We don't have the FF Annual up here. Oh, there we go. Here's a prime example. This is where evaluation becomes important, really important. I had a collection come in. This is the book here. On the right is the copy I bought, raw. On the left is just a poor example of a lower grade copy, and I just want to show you the difference in evaluation. That copy is so bad, we had a price tag on it of 100 something, and we had to cut it in half because nobody wanted to go near it. It's just a low grade copy, but it is a key book. It's Origin of the Submariner. This is a very extremely desirable book and they're not easy to find. I bought the book on the right for about 500 bucks, raw. And I knew what it was when I bought it. And I knew that it could, if I had it pressed, I'd go into pressing later. If I had it pressed, it would probably go up in value. So I went ahead and I had it professionally pressed. And it is now a $15,000 book. This cost me $500 plus the cost of submission to get it pressed and CGC $165. So $665 yield me $15,000. This is important because I understand grading, and it's a case where you took a raw book and took advantage of a situation, exploited it, and now I'm sitting on my next car. Some of this is tied in with the fact that scarcity is a matter. Scarcity is extremely important in our business. Like we talked about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, that #1 is they're so hard to find. That's why those second and third printings are expensive, because you can't find it. So if you're going to put your money into things, be aware of the hype and the scarcity of something that's coming up. About a year and a half before the Avengers movie came out, we all anticipated Avengers 1s were going to go up in popularity, because when a big movie like that comes up, especially when it's a Marvel movie, because Marvel runs the table here in collecting. I went out and I hit all the guys I knew and I made deals. I bought a stack of Avengers 1s. I worked my magic at Comic-Con, did some deals, and they were all gone in a week just prior to the con. It's thousands of dollars. But you'll see that now there are proposed movie ventures bringing on Guardians of the Galaxy, which was a third-tier Marvel group back in the day that's continuing to resurrect itself and then disappear. Thanos, introduced in Iron Man 55. You saw him at the end of the Marvel Avengers movie. That hype has taken an already acknowledged key book and driven it to astronomical proportions. Rob, raise your hand. There's the king of Iron Man 55s. And you just got to appreciate the fact that you want to look for things to invest in. You understand the grading, you know where the hype is, you understand raw versus CGC, you figure out fair market value is based on a number of things. But it's not always what you see in print. Understand that eBay can be a fool's paradise. You go that route. There are, I belong to several, I have subscriptions to sites. One of those sites is Heritage Auctions. They're a massive, the biggest auction house in the country, but they do comics. They keep an archive of their stuff. You can go on here and you can tab in, and then I looked a previous example, a 9.0 of the same FF Annual 1. You log into here, it's a free site, you don't have to pay, and you can find their historical archives and figure out what they got for pricings. And these guys are so big, if they haven't sold it before, some example, it probably doesn't exist. I also have a membership at a couple of stat sites. GP Analysis is one of those. GP analysis allows you to look at any third-party or submitted price for any CGC book sold in the last 10 years, going back to 2002. What they do is they record all known sales of these books, where it's usually third-party so no one can shift the numbers around at their advantage. Like eBay. You can't twiddle eBay's facts because they're out there in the public venue. No one can alter it. So what you have here is examples of what books are going for, and you see the FF Annual 1. There's a 9.6 that sold a couple of years ago for almost over $15,000. That's what I've got. I've got one of those. It's a scarce book. It's scarce and high grade. It's scarce CGC'd. So when you subscribe to this site, you can take your CGC collection and figure out not only in real time what your book is worth, but what it's actually achieving. And also, you look at the little down arrows, the purple arrows and the green arrows. They tell you what direction those values are going, and that's really good for predicting the future. Is you want to know that the book you got is actually worth getting. And if you see nothing but blue or purple arrows, just move on. Find something else. There is the comic book price guide online. This is new, relatively new to me, but I know a lot of people use it. They have also gathered known sales stats on raw versus CGC copies, something the other sites don't do. They literally match up a raw copy that's known to have sold for a certain price with a CGC equivalent in that grade, and they keep a stack of those for every known comic they can get their hands on. And that's good, so you can see the variance between raw and CGC. In other words, if you stumble across a high-grade FF Annual 1 raw, and you want to know what it's actually worth, not what the price guide says it's worth, and what you're likely to get out of it if it ends up in the hands of CGC, you've got a side-by-side comparison. It's good information. There are other pricing guides. There are other systems of pricing. You asking me if this was my Bible. Who asked me? You asked me earlier. It is not my Bible, but it is probably the one that's most popular and the least inoffensive. That's the best way to put it. It's got enough information in here about prices of books that it still has validity. Although why they've got 4 pages of Star Trek comic book back issue grades, I have no idea. Some things have kind of been relegated to a different part of time. Finally, I've been over the buy it nows. I can't emphasize this enough. Comic book collections come into my shop all the time. Every day we get calls. Matt's one of my employees back there. These guys are forever fielding 2, 3, 4 calls a day to try to sell us collections. And when we get somebody that it seems like this probably be lucrative for him and us to come in, so many of them are trying to challenge me. Well, you know, they want me to buy a book from them. I say, well, it's worth this much. Well, I saw it on eBay for this much. Was it a buy it now or a completed listing? Huh? And I go, dude, was it this or this? I don't know, what difference did it make? Well, we found examples of buy it nows. We had a guy it was a buy it now of 120. Auction price, 60. Actual sold a copy for 60, same book. So the buy it now is a ripoff. Study further, look a little further. Just keep in mind that buy it now means nothing. All right, so where do you go? Where do you go to buy this stuff? I learned my rules at Comic-Cons. Buying, selling, everything, all the permutations of getting fooled, ripped off, grinded down, all of that came from Comic-Cons. Comic book stores rarely ever keep exotic copies of comic books in huge quantities. There's just not a lot out there. Most comic book stores are relegated to the comic book shop boutique method of selling games, toys, merchandise, new comics, and some back issues. We're not that way, so we have a lot of hardcore experience. When you're going to go buy an exotic comic book, rule number 1, if you can't open it up, if you can't hold on to it, if you can't examine it, you're already going to take a chance on getting screwed. It needs the 3 dimensions. You need to be able to see the defects that are hidden that you will not pick up on an eBay scan. Or even worse, somebody used their camera phone to take a picture of something they put on eBay. It doesn't tell you anything about grading. You can't see the microscopic ractings along the spine that ultimately will make the difference between a fine copy and a 3 times as expensive near mint copy. The comic book store is ideal for going through. Your next chance is to get your hands on old comics is Comic-Con. although most of you can't get into Comic-Con anymore. I'm lucky I can get my butt in there at all. So you want to go to Comic-Cons, but it's not the only game in town. This is a prime place to go. You can get your hands on Guy's Back issues and start looking through stuff. And this is a good place because I think most of the dealers in here are probably bargain-minded and ready to deal with you, and it's a chance to get something for a good price. But if you shift over from the hands-on level to the hands-off level where you're buying through the net, through a catalog, from a picture, you just keep in mind grading, grading, grading. If you can't see the grade of the book, and if they didn't bother to put a high-res, large, scan front and back cover picture on there, you're probably not going to get what you want. There's too much hidden unless it's been CGC'd. Always ask for more information when you put your money into a comic book online. eBay, if you can't get satisfaction from an answer, can I see a scan of the back cover? Nothing comes across, don't deal with the guy. What's the page quality? Are the staples intact inside? Are there any tears? If you can't get satisfaction, do not buy this book. Get as much information or just move on. If I've learned anything on eBay, if it didn't show up today, it'll be there tomorrow in somebody else's hands. And just keep in mind, there are two kinds of eBay buyers, just like there are two kinds of motorcycle riders. When it comes to riding a motorcycle, there are two kinds, the one who crashed and the one who's gonna crash. When it comes to eBay, you either get burned or you're gonna get burned. I've been burned, but I took steps and I got unburned. So I caution you to be careful on the net. Just do what you have to do, but ask questions. You have guys who are one-on-one, like a website or a catalog. You establish a relationship with one of those guys, you're probably not going to have to worry. And if you have a problem with those guys, you get a book and you weren't happy with it. I know a lot of the guys who deal in exotic stuff through the websites, and most of those guys are honest, and they'll go ahead and just work a deal with you, refund or start over again. Besides eBay, you have auction houses like Comic Link, Comic Connect. I think these places are great, especially Comic Link and Comic Connect, because unlike Heritage, they have like a 28% fee. Comic Link and Comic Connect are only 10% if you want to sell something. That's not bad. Finally, need I say more? Okay, this is the best and worst of both worlds. This is where you get to put your hands on stuff, but it's Craigslist. Strangers coming to your house, or you go to a stranger's house. You don't know who you're getting. Swap meet, garage sales, be careful of the guy who's got a box of 80s and 90s books and he tells you that these are extremely rare, they were owned by my grandparents. I get those things for a nickel a book every day. Don't be fooled. All right, let's move on. CGC, third-party grading auction house. I have a chart here. I can handle it if you guys want to know what the costs are. I have one of their submission forms. I'll explain it to you. They're extremely expensive to submit a book. This Green Lantern one is a 5-figure book. It's probably going to cost you somewhere between $700 and $1,000 to submit this book to CGC. And when you consider the cost of CGC, keep in mind that the shipping is extremely expensive from them outbound. For you, you can send it in on a dime, but they insist on the most expensive. But the payoff is clear. People who buy on eBay will buy CGC because there's protection in place. You know this book has not been restored by somebody. No one's twiddled with color on the cover to hide a defect. No one's glued the spine or a tear together. No one's repaired something. This is a blue label. This explains that you've got a really high quality copy of a book. And these containers are meant to be archival. They have a Mylar D product that's an inner lining that is chemically neutral, so it won't react with the paper. And then they have the charcoal paper inside, which is supposed to protect the cover from the pages so they don't interact chemically, because the interior newsprint is going to break down. These things degauss in some fashion. So there are only 2 grading companies that I know of. CGC has been around a long time. They're collector acceptable. These guys do a lot of setups at Comic Cons, making it easier for you to submit books, and a lot of people, myself included, have benefited off this. There's always controversy with CGC. There are always differences of opinion about the grade that came back. You've got to understand, if you sent a book in that you knew was a 9.0 and it came back a 7.0, that it's probably because you made a mistake and you were overly excited about your copy and didn't really grasp subtle differences in grade. They rarely make massive mistakes. They make small mistakes occasionally. But more importantly, they're really good at identifying restoration, which can save you a bundle. PGX is a West Coast company. I'm less familiar with them. I don't use them. I know that their submission costs are cheaper. Their turnaround times are much quicker. And that's all I can say about PGX.
To make an analogy, some time ago there was a big blow up in the sport collectible market about counterfeited signatures.
Right.
And the other thing. At this point in time, are there counterfeited graded copies out there, or is that something we still have to look forward to?
There are not counterfeited graded copies, but what you're seeing guys do is they're cleverly manipulating the containers. So they pop open the locks here and here. They'll slip the book, which is in an inner lining, out. They'll razor blade it out. They'll take out the copy in there. They'll put in a slightly less expensive copy and slip it all back together. So if you're, and the locks are one-way locks. You can't re-snap them, but there are ways to seal them if you're not looking for it. Restoration, does everyone understand what comic book restoration implies? Restoration is valid. You can pay people $155 plus an hour to have a comic book that looks butchered, completely rebuilt, and it's a valid book. You can have it, so you can sell it probably for more money than you would have if you had just left it all beat up and raw. But in our business, there are plenty of people who've taken low-grade copies and colored in a little spot here and there to make it look better. They submit them to CGC. CGC catches these things, and you get the dreaded purple label, the label of doom, which means that you're not going to get the kind of money you wanted to because restored books are often devalued in the eyes of collectors. Not to say that the restoration's bad. I bought a Batman 1 that was restored 7.0 for $7,000. I sold it 3 weeks later for $10,000. Restored, just like this. But the key books, that's the key book. Now, it's different if you had Superman number 48. No one's going to care. And if it's restored, they're just going to. So you want to be careful. My law enforcement background, I get a deep sense of justice. And I've also dealt with civil torts. I've sued. In my business, I've sued 5 times. I've won all 5 cases. And literally, everyone's out after you. They all want a piece of you. They all want money. They all want to take a part of you. As a collector, guys are going to constantly try to fool you online, especially. You're always wondering if you got ripped off. You always wonder if you've overpaid. If you have, you can always approach the person you bought it from and try your luck. But that's not always the case, especially online. So what I do is, rather than go into the full aspect of the court system and how to get justice, I'm going to give you one example. On eBay, when you buy a book and it's not as advertised and you want your money back and the dealer's not cooperative, what do? Well, eBay is an empty suit. You can't get anything without working too hard. But because eBay works through its sister site, PayPal, PayPal is highly receptive to how your money is moved around. So PayPal is going to talk to you on the phone, and you want to pose a case that this dealer has defrauded you. PayPal will work with you, but they insist on having a third-party advocate do an assessment, an appraisal, before they're willing to step up and take that appraisal as a source for pressure on the dealer. I don't know if there are others doing them. I know I've done numerous appraisals for guys who got ripped off, and I've submitted the appraisal back to the customer, who then forwarded it on to PayPal, and I've won every one of these cases. So they all got their money back. There are going to be dealers who are in the wind, and PayPal can't do a whole lot for you. these guys are gone. But if they're still active on the net, again, an appraisal from a third-party expert, and my bona fides are established. There are plenty of dealers out there whose bona fides are established, but I'm one of those guys who can help you, walk you through the system and help you get your money back. And it's a $25 fee for someone like me, real simple. It's a fill-in-the-blank 7-page template, but it's there if you need it. You understand that these companies are only there for one reason, that's to make them money. It's not for you. So don't look at this as there's nothing here to protect you ultimately. You have to protect yourself. You have to protect yourself from yourself is the phrase. So and you may have questions about this. I don't know all the answers, but I know the answers I've needed to get justice. So I brought a couple samples. I don't know if anybody needs them. 2 examples of chemically neutral comic book storage bags. If you're bound and determined to spend the most amount of money you can on your collection and you want your books to be singularly safe, they're still going to be aged because these are not airtight. They seal the air in if you tape them over. But because they're chemically inert, they will not react chemically with the breaking down of the newsprint and comics. So if you want to come up and you aren't certain what an archive is or a MyLite, I brought some examples. Really, common sense is all you need to know about storing books. Those bags and boards that you get comic books in are always short-term. Either the bags are polypropylene or polyurethane. It's a chemical byproduct. They break down chemically, and they're chemically active with the newsprint. The acids in the print will react with the bags, and all that breaks down. So those are called short-term solutions. You got to change those things out from time to time. You can put a lot of money into stuff. There are varying ways that you can store things. The smartest way is put them in an archive. You don't need a board. Store them flat in a box in your closet. They'll stay forever. There are more expensive, exotic ways to degauss these things so that they're airtight. But this is expensive. A pack of 50 is like $45. But that is if you've got expensive Silver Age books and you don't want to send them to CGC, put them in that. Now I got the examples right here. Put in one of these, lay them flat in your box, and they'll last forever. And if you alternate the covers because the spines are often thicker, alternate the books so they stay flat, you've done your job and you don't have to go through a lot of nonsense. There are other ways. I have to store them differently because my customers handle them, so we have to use a different system, but we understand that system's limitations. I can go into this after if you guys have more questions. Any questions on this stuff, though? Buy the book you want, or buy the book you can afford. Then, when you have money, buy the book you want and sell the book you could afford off to use that money against this money. When it comes to these key books, even the low-grade copies are selling for much more than Overstreet price guide prices. And they keep going up in value. So this low-grade copy, or this is actually a VF minus, so I can't call this low-grade. But the difference, this is a $1,200 copy. This is just a few tick marks better looking than this one, and it's a $4,500 copy. So buy what you can afford. Rule number 1, what I said from the beginning, buy what you want, buy what you can afford, but don't think that you're hamstrung because now you've got all these copies you upgraded. You can use the upgrades for trade. I see this all the time. I want this stuff. I'm at con, guy comes in with his cast-offs. He's got all new copies, so he's got a bunch of second-tier copies he started with. But he's got a bunch of that stuff. He comes to me and says, well, I make an offer. He knows he's not going to get the full value for the book. But as trade matter goes, I'll give him near full value in trade to get all those all day long. So you kind of have a second-tier system. You keep upgrading and you keep trading off and you just keep escalating up the food chain. It's a good, smart way to make your collection and make some money on the side. That's me. I'm done. Thank you. We got time. We got time. No one's kicking me out yet. So if you got any questions, sure.
I have a question. Are restored copies of CGC graded really worthless or
no?
Value?
No. It comes back to key books run the table. A restored key book, highly desirable. The newer the book, In other words, a 1940s restored book is highly desirable because they're so scarce. Many times all you can find is restored copies. But then you get to the 60s, there's plenty of copies. And so they're not so desirable if they're restored. But the thing is if somebody took a restored book and sent it to CGC, they might have put good money after bad, but they've done all the work for you. They already paid out the butt for a restored book. Now they can't get the kind of money out of it they need, so buy it. You'll get it for a good price, and you don't have to send it to CGC and pay that exorbitant fee. They already did it for you. It's back to the same thing. Buy what you want, but buy what you can afford. And if you can afford, Amazing Fantasy 15, let's say a low-grade copy that's been color touched, somebody drew in where the brown and the black are broken up. It's about a $2,500 copy. Unrestored, $6,500. Which can you afford? And yet both are equally desirable because the damn book's on fire. So does that help?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. It's just keep in mind, restoreds were done for one reason only, greed. Somebody's trying to jack up the price and they don't want you to know that it was restored so they can bleed you dry. So just keep thinking restored equals evil. And if it's some guy who did it himself or he's trying to pass it off without telling you, he's committing an act of theft. And so you want to be heads up about that first. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I had one about professionally graded autograph comics. You had a couple up there. I go to con and bring the comic book and get it signed. How difficult is it to authenticate that autograph and get it professionally graded?
It's extremely difficult. First of all, I'm glad you brought it up because I should have mentioned this before. Autographed comic books are not like autographed sports figures or Hollywood celebrities. We recognize the Jack Kirby's and the Stan Lees of the world. But the major market in terms of signature collectability does not recognize these guys as viable price increases. So it's still more or less an interesting thing. You see the CGC books that have the signature label, those are authenticated because it was done in front of somebody. But then you see the Stan Lee autographed, okay, you have a Stan Lee autograph where Stan Lee's still around, and he signed this in front of the company itself, so they authenticated it right on the spot. I've got Stan Lee autographs all over my shop. You're here in San Diego. There's not one city in the entire world that has more autographed comics than here. And because I'm the main store when it comes to buying collection, I get them all the time. I recognize Stan Lee's signature if I'm drunk. I've seen it so often. So, yet that doesn't matter to CGC because they need a witness. And no one's forging signatures, by the way. Don't think that that's happening because there's no money in forgery for signatures in our hobby. No one's been able to figure that out yet. It's just not working. You go through the GP analysis to look at all the third-party graded sales of books, and you'll see that a lot of signature books go for pretty much the same as a non-signature book. There's a lot of hype around Stan Lee right now, and all of a sudden we're seeing some of his stuff go up, and we see buy it nows on eBay where they're out of control. But then we look at the stats on GP analysis, and we see that the signature series stuff is actually flatlined. So all that artificial stuff on eBay is just that. It's all hype. It's not really happening. So I know at the time they were actually pulling them off the production line and letting the artists sign them right off the line so they could get 9/8 out of them. So if you went to the printer, there supposedly Todd McFarlane would be standing there, and as his comics came off, they'd pull a few, try to find the 9/8, and he'd sign them, and then they'd encapsulate them with a yellow label. Yeah. These are urban legends. I don't really know what they're doing. The rule number one is signatures don't do what you want them to do.
At least not in the broader market, to an individual they might.
It goes back to rule number one. Buy what you like, buy what you can afford. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Comics aren't all kid stuff, dollar books and funny animals. Some books are special, some books are fancy, some books need special attention. And for that, we call in the forensic comicologist. Not me, it's Jamie, I'm not. Jamie, what is this? What are we doing?
We are displaying 2 copies of the intro to one of the most exciting, dominating characters in comic books, the Punisher. Forget the fact that it's Amazing Spider-Man. This is actually the Punisher's first appearance.
Why is he not have his own book? Why is he hopping into somebody else's?
This was actually, the thought processes were simple. The writer and editor at the time were looking for a villain to pair up with Spider-Man. Mac Bolan's The Executioner, the novel series, were dominating the newsstands and magazine racks in the 60s and 70s. So they created their own assassin, the Punisher. And while they're building this character up, they realized what they had was an anti-hero, somebody that has remorse and has a backstory and could actually become a hero.
Makes sense, kind of like the 70s cop movies, your Dirty Harrys, your
Sure.
Serpicos, things like that, underground kind of vigilante stuff. That
Like
makes sense.
Shaft, you know,
Yeah.
the anti-heroes that became popular right after Vietnam War.
Are these expensive books? Can we talk about them?
They are.
Okay. Should I touch them?
You can actually, you might want to open this one up. So we'll look at the interior, the white glove treatment. Literally the acids on a human skin can create defects in these sensitive old newsprint comic books.
Is it a $15 book? Oh no.
No, that's a $725 book.
What's that now?
And the better copy, the one that is fewer defects, is actually a $1,500 copy.
There's no period here. It's 1,500. Well, let's begin. Now, why is this book expensive? I get it's the first Punisher, but what could possibly make it almost $1,000?
Well, I think if you look at the exterior and the interior, you'll see that a couple of the reasons are pretty clear. One is the color of the newsprint. When this book was originally published, the colors that you see now are sort of a cream color. The introduction of the character, the Punisher, you see it in this Biff Bang Pow splash page right here, where the Punisher is introducing himself as Spider-Man with his foot to his chin. But the reason why this book is worth $725 and not $1,700 is a couple of things. One of them is, you notice the color on the page. It's a cream off-white color. Well, the color of the paper dictates the value in some cases, and in this case, this book was published with white paper, so the age reflects the value and the grade. Another expensive ordeal that books go through is when these books are sold back in the day, there is no care towards the positioning of these things on newsstands or wherever they were sold. So they acquire little indentations. We call them rack dings, little dings you get in the paper on the racks, or the scientific term is transverse stress line. And these stress lines usually are indicated by small little white creases along the spine. From the way they were mounted on the stands or the way they've been held for the last 35, 40 years, however it is, those little dents mattered. Each dent ticks off a few dollars or a few $100 depending on the value of the book.
Wow. Well, I'm glad I did not ding it yet, because I will apparently soon. Now, what is up with this big, fancy, plastic, hardcover nonsense?
This book has been third-party graded. That adds objectivity and a neutral value to the book so that whoever shows an interest in this knows that it's been viewed by somebody who's been objective about it and isn't attaching a false value. It came back from the third-party grader at a grade called a 9.4, which is substantially what we call a near mint copy, but it's high grade. It drives the value and the desirability up. This book has no transverse stress lines, and according to the indicator in here, the paper is white, so it maintains after 40 years the same color consistency as it did when it sold. So it's worth twice as much as this copy for things that the cameras might not even be able to pick up, but it means that much difference to the collector.
Wow. That is a lot of nerdy talk, but important because, what is this out of 10? 9.4?
10 is the mythical high point you're probably rarely ever, if ever, going to see.
So this is an A- book, and this is like a B+. So stay in school, which is the lesson here, I suppose. Interesting stuff. Thank you for teaching us about the world of transverse stress lines that you need to know about.